Right, here we are, Kinesiology 230, Chapter 13, Talking Resistance Exercise Technique. And the book goes into a discussion regarding alternative equipment. And there's a host of different types of equipment you can use in any gym. There's no doubt if you're creative enough and familiar enough with the equipment, you can utilize any number of different modes of training or modalities of training. The book lists that most are like free weight equipment because it permits movement in any number of planes, which is accurate. And then also the simple fact that almost everything that you pick up in a gym, whether it's a kettlebell, medicine ball, dumbbell, whatever it may be, those are all pulled perpendicular to the floor because of gravity. The only piece of equipment that isn't really pulled perpendicular to the floor because of gravity ends up being bands. Bands still have a little bit of negligible weight to them as they're being pulled down to the floor, but their resistance is being offered due to the stretch of the band. The further you stretch the band, the more resistance it offers. So here are some examples the book provides. We have tires. They note that if you're going to do like any kind of tire flipping, your client should probably be able to do like a sumo deadlift with good technique. They didn't really specify the actual weight amount though. Weighted bags, which are pretty common in gyms. Ropes, so you see a lot of battle rope work, and they can be pretty creative with battle ropes. Instability devices, whether it's half foam rollers, foam mats, yoga blocks, BOSUs, or other pieces of equipment. You can use them to integrate instability into a workout. Chains are more like progressive resistance because when you put the chain on the bar itself, and as you're lifting up, you're picking up more and more and more of the chain. And the book provides a picture of somebody doing bench press with chains on, and it should give you an idea of the progressiveness as you go through a range of motion. Also, talk about medicine ball and slam balls. Medicine balls are, the balls that have a little more resiliency to them. The slam balls, when you throw them down on the floor, you bounce them. They really don't have a bounce to them. They kind of hit the surface they're bouncing off of, and they absorb the force, and they just kind of drop at that point. So there's really not a lot of recoil with slam balls, where medicine balls tend to have slam balls. And that's a point that you have to make with your clients, because they might pick a medicine ball up and think they're going to slam it down to the floor, and they slam it down to the floor, it comes right back up and it bounces up in their face. So, you have to kind of guide your clients in that, because they just might not know any better. I mentioned these earlier, the resistance bands, elastomers, different colors with different companies, different colors denote different thickness, different resistance. And elastic bands, the further you stretch them, the more resistance they offer. And wooden clubs, which really aren't that prevalent in facilities anymore. But you might see some random wooden clubs where you're holding onto like the neck of a club, or it might be like a mace type looking piece of equipment where it's a long handle with the weight on the end, and you're doing things behind the back, over the head, and you're working on rotational work as you're passing the mace from behind the head to one hand, back over to the other hand, etc. Sleds are definitely something you're going to see in almost every facility, and those would be weighted sleds that you use for pushing or pulling, or the ones that have the wheels on them where they might have weights, but they also have like a restrictor that's in the axle itself that allows you to increase or decrease the amount of resistance being offered. It's like a brake. You'll also see people use like the softer plyo boxes and use those to push across the floor in conjunction with box jumps. Push across the floor, do box jumps is something I've done with my clients. So with the bars itself, I talked a little bit about this in another presentation where I talked about the length of a bar. And when you talk about an Olympic length bar, it's a 7-foot bar. But I also want to point out that whether you're holding a Olympic bar, an easy bar, a short straight bar, a preloaded bar, or a lat pull down bar, you have different grips and widths that you use that are appropriate for the person for the exercise. This part of the presentation will be specific just to holding onto the bar, and they talk about these main points over here to the right when you have proper technique involved. It's the width of the hand grip and the type of hand grip. It's the starting position of the person. For a couple main exercises, you have 5-point body contact position, breathing considerations, and then weight belt recommendations. If we jump into this, they go ahead and go into length regarding the hand grip types. You have pronated, which is an overhand grip. This is from the perspective of a lifter. Supinated, where again, from the perspective of a lifter, they're doing maybe like a bicep curl in this example. Alternated, oftentimes you see this alternated grip in like a deadlift. And then false or open grips. I'll often see this on bench press, but the difference you have, like with an open grip, is when you have the thumb kind of tucked behind the bar. When you have a closed grip, it's when you have the thumb around the bar. When you do Olympic weightlifting, there's also something called a lock grip, where you have your hand around the bar and you have your thumb underneath your index finger, and that allows you to really lock in and hold that bar when you do a clean or a snatch movement. Those are not represented here, but I just want to point that out. Okay, if we take this a step further and we go into starting position, for starting position, all exercise is critical, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What they go into is they talk about the predominant or main components of the body that need to be in contact when we're talking about an exercise. So if we look at, for example, a supine exercise versus a prone exercise, when you have a supine exercise, the back of the head, the upper back and rear shoulders, the lower back and or buttocks, the right foot and the left foot, those are your points of contact. When you're prone, meaning face down, maybe laying down on a bench, you'll have your chin on the bench. Perhaps it'll be your cheek if you have your head turned to the side. It'll be your chest and abdomen, hips in front of the thighs, right hand and left hand. Pretty common sense type stuff, but the book takes time to really kind of go into detail on this, and I'm pretty sure you see that later on. All right, so breathing considerations and Valsalva maneuver. A general mnemonic is just to exhale on exertion. It's a real easy way for your clients to remember to not hold their breath. They don't have to necessarily blow out the ceiling tiles when they're doing a bench press, but they shouldn't hold their breath. And if you get them in the habit of doing exhale on exertion, it's easier for them to remember. With the Valsalva maneuver, it's used with like structural exercises like overhead presses, push press, squats, things where you're loading the spine and you want to have a inter-abdominal pressure to be able to give more support to the spine. And the technique is you close the glottis, which is the flap that keeps the air in the lungs and the throat. And what happens at that point is you end up having this pressurized vessel, which is your midsection with the lungs, and it has this inter-abdominal pressure, and that helps support the vertebral column. You may also be wearing a belt. I get it. But you got to understand that with the Valsalva maneuver, you can't hold your breath indefinitely. Eventually, you have to exhale. So it becomes a timing component too when you do an exercise. If you're doing a maximal bench press, where do you perform the Valsalva maneuver? Probably not so much on bench press, but you'll see guys do it. You'll normally see this on like maximal squat, maximal power clean, maximal snatch, perhaps a push press type movement. But again, you'll see guys or gals pull this off like on supine bench press. And what I have to point out is it is contraindicated for clients with known cardiovascular, metabolic, or respiratory conditions because of the pressure that you're creating intra-abdominally. Now, weight belt recommendations. You have recommendations to wear a belt when it's ground-based and structural in nature that involve lifting maximal or near maximal load. So it's kind of a combination of the two. And I know I talked a little bit about this before, where you have this combination of having the use of a belt in a maximal attempt environment when you're doing exercises that are ground-based or structural, like a squat or a push press or a front squat, etc. And the book, kind of elaborates a little bit further, and I too elaborate a little bit further in another presentation. But the big thing I want to point out is, if you're continually wearing a belt in the gym, and I just saw the same guy that I talked about in the other presentation wearing a belt while they're walking around, or wearing a belt while they're doing lat pull down or tricep push down in this case today, you're kind of detraining the midsection, and you're not really giving it the opportunity, the midsection that is, to giving the midsection the opportunity to get strong enough to be able to just brace itself during those ancillary type exercises. And you are very dependent upon a weight belt going forward, whether it's on ground-based structural loads or doing a tricep pushdown, which is nonsense. So to that end, guys, just realize you can use a belt, you can use wraps and straps, you can use different things, but it's within the right context. Usually your client that you're just meeting for the first time who hasn't worked out in maybe 15 years, they won't need any of that at this point, to be quite honest. You're going to have to work with them and probably put them back together first before you really start putting any kind of heavy load on top of them. All right, signing off from this presentation.